Okay, I think it's up now. All right. Welcome everyone to our first virtual Black Joy Collective event. My name is Quentin Stroud. For those who don't know, I'm a fifth-year doctoral student here at IU in the Education Policy Division, and we started the Black Joy Collective about 3 years ago now, under the mentorship of one of my favorite human beings on the planet, Dr. Abegunde, who is joining us for our first event. Today, we'll be talking about sort of the role of joy in this weird world that we find ourselves in, and hopefully some practical tips to help people think about how to keep their spirits lifted as we're dealing with all of the things that are going on. And so I'll turn over to Professor Abekunde for a second to introduce herself, and then we'll jump into our conversation.
Wonderful. So the feeling is mutual. Amazing being in one of my favorite beings on the planet. So I am currently a faculty member in AAADS, which is African American and African Diaspora Studies, and also the director of the Graduate Mentoring Center on campus. I'm also a poet and a healer, um, lover of community and trees and all those types of things. And so it's good to be in conversation with you because it's been a long time, right?
Yeah,
The
man.
last few months have shifted a lot of things, but it's good to begin the conversation with you again. So
Right.
thank you.
Thank you. It's funny because it just came to me. I feel like maybe the last time I saw you was actually at the conference, right
Mhm.
before
Yeah.
we had the our Black Joy conference, like in February, right before everything shut down. I'm so grateful that we got to do that in person.
Yes.
Yes, I might not have seen you since then, so
Mhm.
this will be fun. Um, so I guess I know you've been doing a lot of podcasts and sort of talking about joy and healing during this time, not only just in thinking about COVID, but the sort of like racial uprising and reckoning that we're having right now. And I'm wondering, like, are there some certain themes that maybe have been emerging in some of this work that you've been doing across the summer? Like, are there things that keep coming back to you about joy and how we should be practicing joy right
Well, what's interesting is that we haven't been focused specifically on joy
now?
in the conversations. It's been about spiritual work and social justice and the links between those two, and as well as how do we take care of ourselves. So I think the reason why it hasn't been focused specifically on joy, because there's a way that I want people to understand, like how to build a practice
Mm,
of joy that is inherent,
cool.
right? That is inherent, that it is in many ways something that you, not only that you want out of your life, but that you come to expect that you will have out of your life, and then how to shift your life and yourself when the things that you consider to be joyful or that you want as part of your life are no longer there, or they need to be revived or rejuvenated.
Right.
And so though that has been the theme, overall in some of the conversations that I've had about rest, about how do we in fact begin to embody these ideas that people talk about, that they theorize about, that are very much in the forefront, but how do we in fact embody them?
Mm. I think that's such a good point because some of it does, particularly when we talk about things like joy, it can feel so abstract. It's just like, oh, like I need to develop joy, but I think that particularly the focus on spirituality is important because then it does help us to think about joy is not some sort of external thing, but as something that we can practice consistently. Like that there are things that we can do to keep ourselves full. And so I'm wondering, I guess maybe the next step of that in some of the work that you've been doing related to spirituality and teaching people how to take care of themselves, what are some of those more practical pieces? Like what does it mean for somebody or somebody listening, right? Like how could they go about creating a practice that is helping them in this way?
One of the first things is gratitude, right? Gratitude, because I don't think in fact that um, that you are necessarily happy, or you don't have to be happy when you are joyful. Those things are very different for me. And thinking about happiness as um, the external, like the things that bring you happiness or make you happy or smile. Joy for me is a very internal practice that gets to be actually external as you practice it, because then it tends to infuse your life right? One can be joyful and find joy in anything from walking to planting, right? I may not find joy in planting
Mm.
because that's not my area of work, right? But I may find joy in just simply sitting. For
Right.
somebody else, that may in fact aggravate them,
Mm.
right? And so part of it for me is gratitude, to begin with a practice of gratitude for what are we happy, what is it before us, and within us that brings us to a place of having almost like an inner smile. What
Mm.
is it that helps us to be untethered? I've talked a lot about being untethered to outcome,
Mm.
being untethered to the past and what's happening, in a way that it doesn't pull us down, but that we are very clear about it, so that we're able to acknowledge it and we're able to name it, but to also realize the power we have not to let it, any situation, to guide us in such a way um, that we are consumed by it. Of all of emotions that one could be consumed by, joy is one of those, and gratitude one of those that can shift your life in ways that you can see things differently. We do sitting for peace every Friday from 11 to 12, and today I introduced a new piece of music that was also accompanied by visuals. And one of the things for me was paying attention to how, as I looked at the visuals, listened to the music, that the very sound of it not only helped us relax, but there are moments in practice for meditation, other things, where I become very quiet, but I also become very prayerful.
Mm.
I become very prayerful to just say, look at what is before me and how grateful I am that there is this water. You know, how grateful I am that there is this mountain. How grateful I am that I have this moment to eat, and how grateful I am to have this moment to eat perhaps this particular leaf
Mm.
or this particular grain of rice. Always acknowledging that there are beings in the world who do not have this, and
Right.
not as a comparison, but to also recognize that in my practice of that acknowledgement, I'm acknowledging also our linking and connection with one another.
Right.
Mm.
I think it's dope. It reminds me a lot of sort of Joe's work. And so for people who are watching this, we've had one of the professors at IU, Dr. Joe Wong, who studies gratitude specifically. And I think that my first interactions with actually practicing gratitude was he used to host these workshops. And I went to one my first semester here and really learned like how do you practice that. And at first, it seems kind of corny. I think a lot of it's funny because I think that as I talk to people in particular, a lot of the work of doing sort of spirituality and sort of inner work comes off to people as sort of being corny, like, oh, go stand in your mirror and tell yourself that you love yourself, or sit or write down um even the gratitude at first, right? I kind of was just like, this is goofy. Like I'm just sitting down writing, oh, I'm grateful for this book, or I'm grateful for these things. But over time, uh, it did really change my perspective because I think, like you're saying, you can't really can't practice gratitude. Well, if you're practicing gratitude, you're also focusing on the present. You're practicing focusing on the present because you're focusing on being grateful for the things that are around you. And so now I think that after doing the work for so long, it's made it easier for me to find things to be grateful for, or maybe it's shifted the way that I notice things that I have to be grateful for that I probably just wouldn't have paid attention to before, right? Like, so even like I'm sitting in my desk in this room, and just like as we're talking, I'm noticing the feeling of the sun on my arm, right? Like, and like how warm it is to be in the house. And I think about, oh, I'm so grateful for having this house because I could not, right? Like, being able to look outside my window and see the trees changing, right? And how beautiful that is, and really taking time to notice and to pay attention to the reality is like we do have so many things to be grateful for in the present, right? And I think that to your earlier point, it's kind of that's kind of hard though, right? Like really sort of like centering yourself in just sort of the present moment and what's right in front of you, like especially getting to this age and thinking like about all of these things in the past, right? Like things in moments that I wish I could have changed, things that I wish would have been different, and because we live how we live, there's a lot of worry about the future, right? Like, what is going to happen? Like, will I be able to get the job? Will I do this? Will these things happen? Will the world go back to what it was like before? Uh, and sort of the taking time to really practice gratitude, I think has helped me to just keep myself still. Like, it's kind of like, this is what's happening. Like, this is what's happening right now. And even in this moment, even if it isn't the best, there are still so many things to be grateful for, and to really it helps me to remember, like, this moment is just a moment. Like, this too shall pass. I've been trying to, like, remember that a lot. It's like, no matter what is happening, like, eventually something else will sort of come to pass. And sort of that practice of just writing down, like, I am grateful for this thing, and like Joe said, because, right, I'm grateful
Right.
for this.
Yes.
That's the next part, right? Like, and it's all that you,
Right.
but it's like, I'm grateful. And for people out there who are listening, like, I think that it's important when you're thinking about your gratitude practices, and it's something as simple as just writing it down. It's really that note of, like, I am grateful for, I'm grateful to be on this conversation with Professor Abegunde right now, because I know that I'm going to learn so many things from her, and I'm going to be able to take away practices that help me think about joy. And so when we're thinking about how to practice gratitude, it's like, you want to note the thing of what it is that you're grateful for, but also give it some substance. Like, why are you grateful for? What is that thing doing for you? And then Professor Abegunde, so you.
It's true. The because part is very important. So I'm all of my life I've been influenced by the work, for example, of Thich Nhat Hanh,
Mhm.
right? The uh, groups of people, particularly Black Dharma practitioners and radical Dharma, and all of those things, because that looks different by the work of Zenju Earthling Manuel, right? Like all of the practitioners. So in a very Buddhist sense, although I'm not a Buddhist practitioner, right? But that was my earliest influence, even when I was a teenager and when I was in high school. So it's not simply the stating of these things, but understanding the reason why, or your intent and reason why, because it's also very um it can become very comfortable to say I am grateful for, or I have this because, and not be aware of the types of power dynamics that you have set up. And I'm thinking of this now because I remember years and years ago, like almost tell you, like 1998, November 1998, I remember because I was traveling and I was about to get on this boat with Bill Pinkney to go sail for 2 months, the Middle Passage voyage, and there was a television commercial about, and I remember the company that ran the television commercial, and I remember a it was a little white girl, and it was Christmas time, and the advertisement was showing how grateful um, she was to get like these new sneakers, these new clothes, these new things, because, and what they showed them was because all of these quote unquote third world children didn't have them.
Mhm.
And I was so furious that I contacted the company. And I imagine that other people did too, because I never saw that commercial again. And so the gratitude comes from a place of humbleness and recognition of the infinite possibilities, but being able to define at some point, because simply because you have gratitude, does not mean that you're happy with your situation. And so there's also a balance to be had to say, well, I'm just glad that I have so and so, right? Or I'm just glad like I got up this morning. But does that mean that you stop after the getting up?
Mm.
Right. And so it is an embodiment in recognizing that the gratitude is, again, of recognizing oneself as part of a larger universe, that all beings are connected, that the hands that wash our food and the hands that feed us, right, are often parts of bodies and beings we never see and don't want to see.
Right.
Right? So to give gratitude to the hand, right, that feed us, to grow our food, how then do we extend that to being able to give gratitude to the entire being who is part of a community, perhaps that is invisible, right? So this is when we talk about things around spirituality and social justice, right? This is the framework for me, right? That we gratitude, practices of gratitude, practices of being and being in community, at some point they invite us to not choose,
Mm,
right? To not choose to, not to see, or to see only the hands that feed us or grow our food or take care of us, but they invite us to see everything and everyone.
mm,
Right. And so the intention behind that must be directed always at wholeness, and not to develop gratitude practices or any kind of practice as a way to reaffirm or to reinscribe, oh yeah, I've got this, I'm really grateful. And but at the same time, they can serve as mantras to help you realign, and just as you said, to be able to see what's before you in a different way, so that you are not torn down by perhaps what's not there,
ooh, that's good.
right?
That's good.
Right, and that is a more difficult type of thing. And I'm thinking about, what did Africans and their descendants do, right? It was, if you focus on the nothing. We just finished reading Calvin Warren's Ontological Terror. I
Hmm.
just want to mention that because I want everybody to read this book so we can have more conversations about it. And the question is, like, how do you make something out of nothing? If as a being, you see yourself as being, as a Black person in the world, but part of his argument is that it's nothing. Black equals nothing,
Mm,
right? How do you make something out of nothing? And so many parts of our lives, particularly right now in this very difficult time, is um, is full of what can't be done, what we're struggling with. And I know that everyone, the very quick move to online or to quarantining without any preparation, right? If you're somebody like me, and your work is not on, it's not about necessarily the theorizing of trauma all the time, but working on the ground and with
right,
people in trauma, but keeping a healing centered perspective with it. Instead of me planning for 3 months, like what is going to look for 3 months, I immediately said, okay, 18 months to 2 years.
right.
That means my time, how I work, instead of rushing. It's like, I loved all those videos all summer. Don't rush.
Right.
I love those videos, like, don't
Right.
rush.
That was
Right?
that's ago.
And that was it. Because if you're planning for only a 3 month or a 6 month timeline, you're like, I've got to do it. But if you're planning for a year or 18 months or 2 years, you begin to adjust your expectations on what can be done. And so then for me, it was also helping people building moments of rest, because all of a sudden it was like living in the Postman, Waterworld, and Parable of the Sower, all
Right,
at the same time, with an expectation that Terminator was going to follow next, but right, or Escape from New York or something, right? And living in that, and like, what do you have to do? Like, you have to stop.
right.
You have to stop. You have to figure out how you're going to get to the grocery store, right? What
Mm,
can you do? How are you going to manage when you maybe have to stop for longer periods of time? And in those moments are the opportunities to stop and to say, thank you,
right.
right? Just this thank you. You don't even necessarily need at the moment to name, but just thank you
Right.
and breathe, right? So it's simple, and at the same time, regular practice teaches you, in fact, how complex it can be.
Right.
Mm.
I'm like blown away trying to trying to process it all. There's so many, particularly the issue of with rest. I think um, I'm trying to figure out how do we help people think about how to not feel guilty about taking the rest, right? Like I think that particularly like right, we work in the academy, like it is so much, but it feels like there's always this constant turn of like you need to be being productive all of the time. right? Like constantly, because if you're not, then you, I don't know, something's gonna happen if you're not always working. And one of the things that I actually found some gratitude for in this sort of way that our world has shifted was like when it all happened, I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna just sit here and I'm gonna sleep for a couple days, you know. And it took me a while to get out of it because it's funny because and not to complain, everybody's working all the time, right? But it was the first moment where I realized like I've been working constantly since I was like 15 years old, you know, and my intentions were initially to graduate last year. I had my whole like four and no more. I'm getting out of here. I'm not gonna stay in this program forever. And then sort of reckoning with the fact that like, oh, it's year five now, huh? Like that's happened. And also learning in this moment that it's like sometimes it can feel like a luxury to rest, right? Like I don't have time to rest, or like if I sit down and I take a nap, or I do something to restore myself, then this means that I am not doing something else that I should be doing, right? And those other I should be doings often feel more important or more pressing than our own need to take care of ourselves, like our own need to actually rest. And so I've been trying to think about like how do we get past that? Like how do we help people to honestly just be okay with resting? Because I feel like that's not normal to everybody, right? Like that it's just like, oh, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to rest, and when I am done resting, then I'll return to my work. Like, and I'll be better for my body will be better for it, my mind will be better, the people around me will be better for having a version of me that is rested and is ready to participate in the world, right? But like that guilt is still there sometimes, right? Like, and like, how do we? I don't know. How do we address that? Is there a way to address that, or is it just something that you kind of it's just there?
Well, there are a couple of things. First, I want to direct people towards the NAP ministry.
Yeah.
Right? I want to direct them to that because the amazing being in the world, Minister Nap Bishop, uh, Hersey Patrick, right? Trisha, um, this is her work in the world, and uh, so I want people to check them out. You know, to check out podcasts, interviews, the blog, all of those things, and to hear what she's saying. Right? She has, of course, framed this within the context of African American history and culture. And the first time that I experienced her work, it was. Within also the context of sharecropping and plantation work and understanding how it is that Black people have not rested.
Right.
Right. And so there's that. So there are resources, and that's one of the best resources that I know. And having said that, one of the things that I see about what makes her work so important is going to the foundation of things. Like you it's like anything else. You can't make people do things.
Right.
Right? Guilt and shame. Right? Guilt and shame are come out of experiences. Right? Are shaped by experiences. Are um, things that we develop as we live, about where it is that we are made to feel like we don't conform, or where we don't believe, or that we've done something wrong. And so I don't think about it in terms of, just like the short term, because once you begin doing that work, you have to address the structures and the experiences that created them,
Right.
right? That is some deep level work, because you go to a workshop or before you go to the class, right? And you develop these practice or these strategies or these tools, right? That's what they are in the beginning. The more you do them for them to become practices, the more you are likely to unravel and begin to see.
Right.
Right. And this is the part that we don't talk about. See, that's my work
Mhm.
about the transparency, that when you come to the yoga mat, when you come to your pillow, when you begin doing these things, that if you're doing that work and you allow yourself the moments to see and enter your own life and to enter your own breath, there are some moments where you begin to fall apart, because the more you do the work, the things that you have built your life or your thoughts on, even other practices, if you are able to look at them and see them for what they truly are and what they are tying together, once you begin to see it, it's unlocking quite literally another level and another key. That is some deep level work. I
Right.
see it happen in, in my classroom. And part of it is allowing people the space to do the exploration. So you can tell people that you should rest, but most people, they get sick. By the time you are sick, your body and your mind and your brain, everything you've gotten warnings prior to that. I think of that sickness as one of the last resorts of the way that your body is telling you, right?
Right.
That you need to stop and slow down. And that's when people do it. I, for me, in terms of thinking about framing it, if I am not resting, so even though, I'm up at really weird times for me at this particular moment in time, my brain is very active at a different hour. I go with it. So that means, and you can't make up sleep, you can't
Right.
make it up, right? Um, to just go with it, and then my body will readjust after I've gotten the work done. And I know this as a poet and as a writer, as a creative person. Like when I go in residency, for example, when I don't have to do anything but get up and do my work, I'll sleep for 3 days. People used to think I was weird. I'm like, I've come to this great residency, and they're like, what are you gonna, I'm gonna sleep for 3 days. I'm going to sleep for 3 days to reset my body and reset my mind. And then I'm going to get up and work. And then I'm going to allow my body to tell me what is the proper rhythm for working. Like noticing when is my brain most active in order to actually create.
Right.
I discovered one year after 3 residencies that it fell right in the middle of my workday, like literally like middle of my workday. And I was like, oh, something has to go. It won't be my writing. So guess what? I mean, you can see what else I can do.
Mm.
And so one of the things is, talking to people about what are the consequences when you don't rest? What are the consequences
Right.
when you don't do X, Y, Z, whatever that is for you that keeps you in balance?
Mm.
And so I like to invite people to, in fact, spend some time thinking about what brings them in balance, what keeps them in balance. If you know that you need to get up and walk for 5 minutes only, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and you don't do that, what are the consequences?
Mm.
Right? And are there consequences you're willing to live with? Because it's also not to say, oh my God, I've got to do this like 7 days a week. And if I missed one day, like something's going to happen. No, what are the consequences? It's always about balance.
Right.
Right? It's always about balance and being able to ask yourself, is what I'm working towards, is it worth it? So yes, produce, 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 but who gets to see the production? Is it in fact bringing you the type of joy that you need to have in your life? Is it causing you more stress?
Mm.
If it is, how do you realign that? Sometimes it's simply just asking someone, right, for help. But that's another area in which we struggle, right? We assume that if we ask for help that we are weak or something is wrong, but that's not working within a community, right? If you're working within a community whose goal it is to uplift everyone and to support the people within the community, perhaps somebody notices, hey, do you need some help? Or to say, hey, I need some help and this is what I need help with.
Right.
So this is also about communication with oneself, communication with the people we are communing with, right? And being able to know that sometimes stopping, I mean, let's think about it, right? Trees are rooted. Trees are rooted. I know that they move at nighttime and we can't see them and having conversations, like the one across the street probably having a conversation with, some tree down in Costa Rica and whatnot, right? But for all intents and purposes, they're rooted
Right.
and their branches and leaves move. And at the same time, they fall away. Mm.
Right.
How do we develop the ability to remain rooted, to move, to let things fall away, to let things drop, to change? And to allow change. These are difficult things for human beings.
Yes.
Mm.
Did you? Yeah, I think that, I don't know. I'm saying like where you never know on the Zoom. It's like, wait, are they done? Are they done? Uh, I think that's funny. I think that fall is one of my favorite seasons just because like we talked about this before we got on the earlier. Like I'm looking at this tree outside the window that is orange now, right? Like and I'm watching the leaves fall away from it. And then fall, I love fall because it always reminds me like how beautiful that process is, right? To like let go of things in order for new parts of yourself uh, to come forth. But that feels like you said, it's very difficult for humans to change uh, or to accept these sort of changing. And I feel like that is honestly a part of so much of our dis-ease with the sort of experience of being, right? Like, is that it's like recognize like you will change across the span of your life, but then wanting so badly to hold on to that old whatever you were, right? Like, and like really thinking about how do we both show gratitude for the current version of ourselves and for the versions of ourselves that have allowed us to be where we are now and to be in the world, while also um, being okay with letting go of that, right? Like the Quentin that I am today will not be here in 3, 4 years, 5 years, right? Like I will have adjusted. My life will have opened up different experiences and a myriad of possibilities for me that I cannot. I don't even know. I don't know what'll happen. I don't know how I'll change. But learning as I've aged, I'm starting to see this like really learning to be okay with the fact that like you're different. The world is different. We live in a dynamic and ever-changing universe. Everything is always changing, right? And so we are a part of that process of things that are constantly changing, constantly turning over. But I think that that is, and in a way, that feels connected to your earlier point about sort of recognizing our connectivity with everything around us, right? Like, and it's like, and so I feel like I'm understanding that a bit more because it's like you have to see yourself as a part of this community. You have to see yourself as a part of all of this dynamic everything that you are a part of. Um, I don't know. Some for some reason to me that makes all of it feel less personal in a way. Like sometimes you get caught up in your own sort of suffering, and you're like, "Oh my God, these things are happening to me. Why are things so bad for me? Why is it all like?" And recognizing yourself as a part of this larger sort of literal world of people who are experiencing very similar things to yourselves in terms of sort of emotions. That everybody's angry, everyone is mad, everyone's sad, everyone is disappointed, everyone in their own way is experiencing some particular form of suffering that is unique to them, but suffering itself is not unique to any of us. I feel like that sort of recognition of our sort of shared, I don't know, that feels like that's what it is to be human. And seeing that and recognizing that that is not something personal, but it is a part of what it means to be on this planet makes it a bit easier to deal with some of it sometimes. I don't know.
I think it helps us develop compassion.
Yes.
I feel, in this conversation, I feel like I'm going back to all of my earlier Buddhist teachings for some reason. I'm not sure. Because when I was thinking, one of the very first things I learned was about impermanence.
Mhm.
There's impermanence and being able to understand that in a very real way. My mother died when I was very young, and just thinking about what is impermanent. I think gardens are good ways to teach you about impermanence, and having compassion, right? At the same time, some of those things are finding a way to integrate them or apply them to our current situation, right?
Right.
Because you can have compassion, but at the same time, if you are in particular bodies in the world, like as a Black woman, like my compassion may only go so far. Thinking about, recently a work that I wrote for Breonna Taylor, and understanding in a very metaphysical way that I am Breonna Taylor because any Black body will do, right, in this situation. And so there is always the balance, right? And for me, the thought and the aspect of being Black in the world is also one that allows me to think about the very nature of being, right, and compassion, and always having to balance the desire and the practice of compassion with the rejection of that compassion.
Right.
Right. So my understanding of being connected to everything in the world, right, and being a compassionate being does not mean that I won't be treated like a Black woman in the world.
Right.
Right, but I get to choose how I will respond to that, which does not always necessarily mean that I'm going to be sitting around and being grateful this, right? That's not it. It is those practices are the practices that are internal that bring you back to what you understand, right? What you understand to be joy and community that sustain you in the work that you must do externally,
Right.
right? And I think this is sometimes a very difficult way. You see it happening between generations and like, why aren't you out doing this? You should be doing this. But what is the nature? And this, the question that you asked at the conference, about Black joy and how to feel about that. And I said that I resent that I even have to put, to qualify that, right?
Right.
And that our experiences, and though this in itself, right, is a conflict, right? And it means that practice must be deeper, that
Mm,
what you choose to be grateful about must be deeper as a way to anchor you,
mm,
right? And so that for me, again, this is something that I said earlier in the summer, that understanding, like this is the moment, and understanding how to be tethered or not tethered to something is freeing. But for me, it also means that I understand not only my position now, but my position in the future
mm,
and the power that I have to make choices.
mm.
That does not mean that I do not speak up, right? It does not mean that I am silent, right? Because you could very easily say, oh, I'm so grateful that I have this job, or I'm so grateful that I have this food. But if somebody is feeding you the scraps off their floor, not even their table, for what are you grateful?
Right.
Right? And you may be, in fact, grateful for the scraps off the floor, but there's a way that we also have to think about it's for that moment in time.
Hmm.
It's for that moment in time. Otherwise, we can convince ourselves that the scraps off the floor are the only food that we should have.
Right. That they're enough.
Right, and it is right. So, there are the multiple layers of working through all of these emotions and understanding our experiences, and also thinking about what if suddenly the scraps on the floor become not enough. Are you ungrateful? Are
Mm,
you simply understanding that your condition as a human should be more than this?
mm,
You see? Right? You see, this is for me where the work of Black studies and philosophy, all of these things ask us to question um, everything. We should question everything, right?
right.
But because I'm saying, well, today, like, oh, I'm not feeling like that little scrap of bread. Am I ungrateful? But you may be, in fact, told you're ungrateful because at least you're eating. But has your condition changed? Has the practice of eating the scrap off the floor and perhaps seeing that those around you are not, does it invite you to question your very condition,
Right.
to realize that there is something else and there's something more?
Mm,
Right. This has been part of our conversation in my class, like between um, Courtney R. Baker's Humane Insight
mm.
and Calvin Warren's Ontological Terror, right? What does being like, what does it mean to have consciousness? What does it mean to be able to use that consciousness for good in the world? And to recognize that in thinking about joy, how we feel inside, what is the fire that it lights in us. What is it? How much more energy do we get when we are joyful in doing something, right? Like speaking to you brings me joy because it gives me a real opportunity in many ways to observe myself, right? But it also gives me great opportunity to enjoy just the pleasure of your thinking, right? That you embarked on this years ago to provide an alternative. And part of that alternative was this okay, the scraps on the floor are okay. But at the other hand, here's all this at the water. And
Right,
what happens if you shift your vision and you come to the water and you discover that there are fish, right?
right. I think, yeah, I think this is spot on. And so I'm thinking about balance. I'm also thinking about some of the original reasons for starting the Black Joy Collective, right? Like that was literally where my mind was because it was at the beginning. It was just like I think I myself personally I was so overwhelmed, right? Like as a graduate student, as a Black graduate student at a PWI, very in a very white town, um, at the living through Black Lives Matter, right? We're in class and we're constantly talking about Black people's sort of marginalization and Black people's oppression, which is important, right? Particularly for these conversations about social justice, we have to have these sorts of conversations about the fact that like we're not gonna just keep eating these scraps off of the floor, right? Like we have seen the water, we have seen the fish, and and now we know that they're there, and we're no longer in the mood, right? Like, but thinking about and thinking about what it meant for us to not necessarily have to always think about Black people's pain, but to think about how we live and love and laugh and how we have joy and how we've always had joy, and making more space for that for us, right? Just for us to think about. I felt was so important. And now I'm thinking, I still think it's super important, but I'm also thinking about just the intensity of how the world has changed in just in these 3 years and where we find ourselves. And I am really thinking about the role of like our rage. Like, how do we balance uh how do we balance those two things, right? Like, because it's like, is it possible for me to both be enraged and joyful? Can I use my can I be joyfully enraged, right? Like, can I do these things conflict with one another, or do they work in the way that potentially they could be fueling one another, if that makes sense? Because it feels difficult, like there is a lot of rage, right? Like there, and so it's like, and I see the capacity of that rage to shift the world around us, right? But I also know that joy has that same capacity to shift the world around us. And so I don't know how to balance it.
Well, I wanted to direct, you to Love and Rage, The Path of Liberation Through Anger by Lama Rod Owen. So earlier I was talking about, radical Dharma. Um, he is part of this particular lineage, but Love and Rage, The Path of Liberation through um and then also Radical Dharma by Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams, and also Lama Rod Owens and Jasmine Sedula. So Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation. Because I think one of the things, and when we think about gratitude and joy and rage and anger, is that we think that they can't occupy the same space,
Mm,
and we think that we have to set one aside in order to have the other, and that one perhaps sometimes is better than the other,
right,
right? It is the society in which we live in, particularly if we are Black, that to be angry or to show anger or to show discomfort or anything like that is to put you on the far side of being dangerous, right? And so when we think about that, our rage is that what may have been um, just anger, that anger pushed down. So it's the difference of saying, I'm really angry because, I've missed my bus
right,
today. And then you mention that perhaps to the bus people, and nobody does anything. And for the next 5 times, you miss the bus, not because you weren't there on time. And then but you've learned that if you say something, that nothing gets done.
Mm.
And then finally, one day, you've had enough, right? And then it looks like it's rage. It looks like, but in fact, the bus has left you for the past 6 months.
Right.
Right, and, I've seen this happen in Bloom, like, twice. Once I've complained to the bus company because we tried to explain to the bus driver that there was a woman who got the bus every morning at this time, but she had difficulty walking. It was in the middle of winter, and they still left the person,
Mm.
and then literally getting off a bus one day because it said, "Somebody will be here in 2 minutes." They have, like, 3 minutes to think, "Wait, that they can be here. Can you wait? Can't wait. Pull off." And, like, I don't know, I found myself not yelling at the bus driver, but saying, "Look, you did this thing. It would not have harmed you.
Right.
The bus only runs once an hour. You could have made up those 3 minutes
At any point.
at
Yeah.
any point," right? And so not letting the things that we need to say be suppressed. And so that also means finding a way to speak them in the way that we need to speak them, but also that in a way that they can be heard.
Right.
Right. And so this balance, right, it perhaps is not a realistic idea that those things should be balanced because one may need to happen first before the other can emerge, before you can think about or witness or experience them to understand how they can, in fact, be balanced.
Right.
Right. And that is the thing, because sometimes you've done so much of the gratitude and I'm happy in this that you have forgotten that in fact that you were angry,
Right. And that needs to be addressed as
and
well.
that needs to be addressed. And so the practice of being balanced is not pushing them away and thinking, well, they have to be here and I need to look at one first or the other, is being able to let what's surfacing to surface, to acknowledge it. Right. And to make the decision, how am I going to deal with my anger? Because this is not perhaps the way that I want to feel. Or how am I going to deal with my anger because it makes me feel like X,
Right.
and that it makes me feel unmoored in some way. But I want to acknowledge the anger. I think the practices of Thich Nhat Hanh and the Dalai Lama are really instructive, like in this way, to acknowledge what is happening, right? To be able to articulate it, because many of us are unable to articulate the anger because it comes in a flash.
Right.
By that time, it's the rage. And then we convince ourselves that if we move out of it back to this love and this gratitude, that it will all be okay. But the anger is still there because it has not been spoken. And so, hence, we see what we see
Right.
now, right? And so this is, again, the ability to acknowledge and recognize what is happening to us so we can literally look at it
Yeah.
and make a determination. Do we keep it? Do we transfer it in a different way? Right? I'm thinking about Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm thinking about Ella Baker. I'm thinking about, people at the anger that fueled, that
Right.
even opened up spaces for love.
Right.
Right? Even opened up spaces for love, because sometimes you need to speak your anger so someone will know that you have been harmed and wounded, to open up even the possibility for the conversation about love and compassion.
Mhm.
Right? And so these, in terms of thinking about practices, these are some practices. How do I speak my anger in a loving way? Which means that the listener has to be practiced in a way of listening to acknowledge the anger, as opposed to saying, oh, well, that's not true. Or what are you angry about?
Right.
I could be angry today just simply because I miss seeing the hummingbird
Mhm.
outside, right? But then I have to think about, why am I angry? Is it, I didn't see the hummingbird, but did I get up early enough to see the hummingbird?
Right.
Was I looking at something else? Was
Right.
it that the hummingbird decided to go someplace else? And it
Right.
don't have nothing to do with me at all.
Right.
right? And so these, and you think about what a practice is to all the time be asking ourselves question. The question is why. It's a child's question. Why? And in
Right,
addition to that, are we there yet? Like, have we reached enlightenment yet? Are we there yet? Are we a compassionate? Are we there yet? Right? These are children's questions. And so it really behooves us to think about children and the questions they ask without prompting.
right.
Mm.
Ooh, that's good. I like don't even know what to say. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh my God, Abegunde. Um, I think one of the things that you were talking about prior to us getting on the phone, I wanted to remember to ask you this, so I'm going to do it now. And we sort of talked about the sort of changing and the shifts of the seasons, but one of your big worries when we first got on the phone was how the impending winter and the shift of the seasons would impact people. Um, Being that we will, especially in our state, that it's going to be super cold, we won't be able to go outside, and thinking about how the sun and the summer sort of restored us during this period. So I think maybe thinking of just like to hear a bit of that for you, what your sort of concerns are, and then maybe are there some things that you're thinking about preemptively for yourself to like keep yourself in balance, and some practices that might be useful for people who are listening as we do move into winter and as we get away from being able to have the sun coming through my window, right? And as the hummingbird decides that maybe she wants to go somewhere else, and not be in the winter with us, like, like, how do you, you know, I want a little bit about some of your concern, but like, how do we address that? How do we make sure that people are taking care of themselves in this as we lose some of our sunshine?
Mm, yeah, it is a concern of mine because I think that perhaps just on my experiences and working in different communities, that we have not yet, in fact, been able to address the deep losses we have. And don't get me wrong, it's been for me the switch was not difficult in the sense that I'm a writer, I'm a poet, I'm accustomed to writing alone. I happen to enjoy um, being by myself. And although that, I have a partner, and a spouse, even if I did not, it probably would be very similar for
Hmm.
me. That's just my nature. And it has meant that members of my community who are far away, that we've actually spent more time talking to each other because we all recognize that we are actually so good at spending time by ourselves.
Right. I,
that, that this, all those memes about this is an introvert's dream,
oh
right?
my
Like
God, right.
this, right?
It's
So
like,
that we made effort to reach out more.
right,
And here in this community, it's been marvelous because people have been cooking for each other. Like we've gotten gifts and all kinds of things and going out and doing things. But there is the concern of mine of that what we're not seeing, like the loss and depression or just sadness and seasonal change, affects that people would normally be experiencing are exacerbated by our inability to see each other in ways. I mean, something as simple as hugging, right? Like perhaps people have not thought about each other, the real importance of, for humans in particular, of touch, right? Of touch and being able to touch someone, even being able to feel somebody, particularly you love or to feel their breath. I mean, all of these things, right, have shifted how we communicate with one another. And perhaps you've experienced this, like, you see a friend, you're doing the 6 to 8 feet apart,
right.
you're talking, and then you're like,
Yeah, like you don't know what to
right,
do.
right, because you want to hug, and they're like, oh, I can't hug, right? And
Right,
so experiences like this, and then thinking about people who have really lost family members,
right,
either from COVID-19 or other things, just daily living, right? So all of this is there. And so as the season begins to change, particularly if you notice, like it's no longer bright and light outside at 9 p.m.
right. Oh my
Right?
God, I miss
It was
this so
like
much.
June 22nd was like, wait a minute, what? There's like a whole hour of light missing. That's what it felt like, right? That's
Yes.
what it felt like. And so this particular moment, like what I'm inviting people in my own communities, with which I work to think about is like now, all the practical things about, whatever lamps that you need, making sure that you're eating well, making sure that you have whatever it is that you need. But also, this is a time to let somebody know that if you already know that you're feeling the effects of it, let one or two people know,
Right.
right? Again, community. Let one or two people know. Um, if you're able to adjust your schedule, right? Don't there's this fight like I have to get up early, I have to get earlier. And if you have children, if you have family at home, I know all of these things are really very difficult.
Right.
It's been difficult with people who have families. It's been difficult with people who don't have families living with them, just in this sudden shift in our way. But let somebody know. And if you're struggling in the morning, is there a way that you can work with, your household members or with yourself, to be okay until the time changes, to be okay? Maybe you need that extra half hour of sleep. Maybe you wake up and you're just in the darkness, right? As opposed to pushing against it. Again, this is not practical information for anybody who needs to get up and work, right? Maybe you need to think about adjusting your time in the evening, for example, right? The key here is to not pretend that it's not happening,
Right.
right? And to acknowledge it. And also, if you are in schedules and you're not able to do, those types of things, is where is it that you build in time, like on the weekend perhaps, or whenever the time might be, because maybe your weekend is Wednesday, right? To build in the time to make sure that you're talking with other people,
Right.
that you are listening to music, right? That on the days and the moments when it is bright outside, to make sure that you find a little bit of time, even if it's only 30 minutes, to even if you're not walking, to just be outside for 30 minutes, when there is sun. Okay. Again, the practice is to get out, to connect, to let other people know, right, that you might need help, and to recognize it, but to also recognize, it's winter time. I'm a firm believer that humans should just be allowed to be light bears and just like sleep from after Thanksgiving, get up for New Year's Eve to celebrate, go back to sleep, and come back out again in March.
Yeah, that sounds lit.
To just sleep, that allow your time as you're slowing down, to do that. um, and to always get the help that you need if you find that this is so consistent and it's difficult. If you are on campus or a campus, find help on your campus that is available to you. This is so important, because suffering may be part of human life, right? But suffering can be addressed.
Right.
Right, suffering can be addressed. And if you see someone, if you are, somebody, and you recognize that you have a friend or even a stranger, or sometimes I've stopped strangers who were crying on the street and like, are you okay? Let's sit. You're not okay. Let's sit out here for a minute.
Right. Does that have a minute?
Right. And just to say, hey, is everything okay? Right. I notice, whatever it is that you noticed. And she was like, are you okay? Well, I'm here if you need, or if you need something, or sometimes you just kind of drop by and you drop something off or send a card,
Mhm.
right? This too, because we're spending so much time in the technology, going back to some of the old ways of communicating are actually joyful and actually beautiful. Like, how often do we get a card in the
Right.
mail from someone?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's spot on. I'm thinking also because you're a poet, I'm wondering how much do you think your creative practice is helpful in a time like this? Because I think I'm also an introvert, right? Like I probably could live like this for a while. Like there are
Mhm.
moments I'm grateful to have my roommate, but I also feel like I'd probably be fine because I would just be in here like writing the plays or like reading a book or just I would manage. But like yourself, I'm also glad that I have someone else in the house because I probably could do that for an odd amount of time, right?
Right,
Like I recognize sometimes that it's probably not that's not good either, right? Like, and so I'm grateful for him. And this time has been in many ways, I think it really strengthened my community, right? Like my friends from undergrad started a random FaceTime group, and there are probably like 30 of us in there. And we never would have talked like this before. But there have been moments where it's the middle of the day and we'll get on that thing and talk for hours, like about nothing. Just about each other's days, or like, one of my friends, Athena, her son, she had a baby. He's like little Emery, he's growing up. And there have been like 2 or 3 times where she's been on the phone and we literally got to watch her bathe Emery and put Emery to bed. And we're like, night, Emery, like, and these moments where it's like that would have never happened before, right? Like we would have never thought to even use this technology in this way for us to really uh, participate more fully in each other's lives in a way, and that to me has been beautiful. I'm so into this. I hope we keep this group forever. It makes me so happy. Um, but I'm also thinking about back to the point about the creativity. Uh, I sort of think that I think everybody inherently creative. I think that everybody has some sort of creative thing that they could be doing. And for me, I think that we started to write these screenplays and stuff, even if they never go anywhere. I feel like they've changed my life so much just in the writing of them. And I'm always trying to recommend that people pick up some sort of creative hobby, some sort of thing. But I know that often feels, I think that creativity gets this, people are nervous to be creative. Like, oh, it needs to be good, or oh, it needs to be this, it needs to be something. But I feel like for me, my creativity and my writing, more than anything, has helped to keep me centered, like helped to keep me grounded, because I like have something that even if the world went to shit, I have this thing that I do for myself, um, that keeps me sort of, it keeps me okay. Like it gives me a sense of just like having something for myself. And also it's made me, I think, more compassionate and more open-minded, because as I write these characters in their different worlds like that, like I find myself feeling for them, right? Like, and I'm like, oh no. One of my professors told me, I took a screenwriting class, and he was like, you're too nice to your characters. He said you do a good job. He said, but you really gotta kind of torture them. And I was like, no. And he was like, well, the story's gonna be boring, right? And so I found myself in these moments, like as I'm learning how to be a better writer and how to tell these stories, like I find myself feeling, like really feeling for the characters. I'm like, oh no, I don't want to have to do this to you, Tony, but I got to. And recognizing that.
Sorry, I got to break your finger, Tony. I'm so sorry.
Oh my god! Like, sorry, I did a redraft, and his like partner passed away, and now he's like a single father. And I'm like, oh my god, this is so sad. But it's funny because having that has done a lot for me, right? Like because I have that compassion for these like fake characters in this world that I've created in my head, and so it's like I have to be more compassionate, because I always am thinking about, I don't really know what's happening to other people, right? Like as I build out these characters and I see these, and it's weird because it's like I'm building out the characters, but in other moments, like it's like all artists, it's kind of like the characters are building themselves in a weird way, and it's something I didn't understand before I started writing, because they're like, I don't know, like I actually don't know where these characters are coming from. Like I don't, like sometimes the writing is happening, and I'm just like, oh, I'm just as interested as it's happening as anything. I'm like, oh, cool, that's what's gonna happen. Cool, like okay, cool. But that process has done so much for me, right? Like I think to your earlier points about community and sort of being able to see one another and being able to think about the sort of ways that other people might be suffering and we might not see. And I don't know. I feel like I think everybody should have something creative. But I know that doesn't feel possible for everybody. Some people, just even the idea that I could be a creative person and this could bring me some joy. Um, and I don't know. I feel like that's like a next part of my mission, like in the world. It's like, how do I, particularly for Black people, help Black people to tap into that part of themselves, because I feel like I know how much it's done for me, right? Like, and I know that it's given me a different way of relating to myself, honestly, and because I'm relating to myself differently, and because I'm thinking about like the traumas that my characters have, I also have to think about my own, because most of the time they are just mine. Right? Like there are moments when I like look back and I'm like, I was talking to Andrea one day and I about something. She's like, the implications of this are this, and I didn't have an answer because I was like, oh, that's just my own fear, and it was like, no, I was like, oh wait, like this is just my thing, huh? That I'm grafting onto these characters.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. I want that. That feels like a part of that feels important to me, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what to do with it, or like how to integrate that into the work that I do.
Mm, mm. That's interesting. Um, I think as you were talking, one of the things that I was thinking about is that creativity, maybe one of the fears is that we think about creativity in terms of, again, production, right? And so the honest to God truth is not everybody is Paul Robeson. I went to a
Right.
lecture yesterday and it was totally beautiful. No, not everybody is Alvin Ailey, right? Not everybody is Bill T. Jones, but one of the things Bill T. Jones and Jermaine Cogney and others did was that they made a space available for people who dreamed it was possible, no matter what their bodies were, to do the work if they wanted to do the work, right? However, your creativity may be in that you, and thinking about how we create, right? Maybe that you have a garden and that you grow flowers and you flower arrange, right? And maybe you only do that for yourself. And so again, we're back to this idea that everything that we do has an inherent um, exchange value, transactional value, as
Right.
opposed to something that inherently feeds us. Now, so as a poet, and I'm going to tell you how that works as a poet, right? I worked on an essay that'll come out, sometime, maybe, I don't know, next year as part of a book. But as I was working, it's like, I have a poem for this. And because I knew I had a poem for it, I had to go back to almost 30 years to poems that had never been published,
Mm.
that I had never thought to get published simply because I wrote them and I leave them and I have them categorized. But the poem, there were two, in fact, that were perfect.
Mm.
And so, as a poet and as a fiction writer, nonfiction writer, sometimes I'm writing on schedule, I'm writing on target, I'm writing, after I've been invited to submit something. And that's its own process, right? But many times I'm writing because I simply want to write. It
Mm.
may be that it never gets published. And this is how, it worked. I may see something, I may finish something, it's like, oh, I want to send this out. But a lot of times I'm writing because I will die if I don't. And this is what I ask people, when they're thinking about, how are you creating? Are you an artist? However you define that, that I will write, obviously, since that poem has just been waiting for 25 years,
Right.
I will write regardless of whether it is ever seen. Right? And that for me is the creative, or to come to understand the nature of how taking a word or a sound and shaping it into narrative,
Hmm.
right? How that makes me feel, and the delight even in the paper and the delight in the pen or the sound, whether or not anybody ever sees it is irrelevant to me.
Right.
The fact is that I'm going to do it. It's like breathing. And I think about the movie Otto Preminger, I think, but I'm not may not be remembering correctly, The Red Shoes.
Mm.
I and it's a story of a young woman who wants to dance, and her aunt sets it up that, Lemontov, who's this very famous choreographer, comes to this party so he could meet her because she wants her daughter in his dance company. And, he does bring in the dance company. What he does is that he puts in all these like crappy places, to dance. But she dances, right? She dances as if she's dancing, right? In these amazing houses. And he sees that, in fact, that she is a career, that she is a dance. She could be telling, dancing in dirt, and it would be the same as if she were dancing on stage in London. But in their initial conversation, he's very irritated because he's like, man, this old woman brought me here to meet her niece. Everybody think they got a gifted niece. And he's talking to her, and he says to her, I've never forgotten this. He says, well, why do you want to dance? And she says, why do you want to breathe?
Hmm.
Right? And this for me is gets back to the joy, the gratitude, the all of these things. Why? Like if I am doing something because someone else is going to see it, and that someone else being able to see the thing that I'm doing, or me, right, determines how I feel and how I'm going to act, or that my being or how I feel about myself is dependent and interdependent on someone else so much being able to see me, then I have to rethink.
Right.
I am going to write, and I have been writing since I was born, right? I'm not, what do you call that? I don't publish often. There's a word. Um, but when I publish,
Right.
right? But the things take for me so long to get moving, or sometimes it's not their time, right? I could not have told you again 25, 30 years later that I knew what the poem was, but here is an essay whose time it is, and this is the time for that work.
Right.
And so we all have, it is one of the beautiful things about being human and having the ability to speak and to have, a mind, right, to create things and thoughts and be able to verbalize those things. But what the other part is to create. It's what is it that we choose to use that particular aspect of our beings to create.
Hmm.
Right. And that is really important to me. But as long as we attach, like create, like you're creative, to the being able to produce something,
Right.
then has value and then is judged, there'll be so many things that we miss.
Right.
That's the difference between telling a 5-year-old child who can draw a circle and put some dots on it, oh, well, that's not artwork. And then somebody else saying to their child who's done it, say, oh my God, that's so
It's
amazing,
beautiful. Right. They keep
right?
going. Hmm.
The child who may have grown up to be an amazing artist won't, because they've just been told they can't. And the child who may not have, in fact, had any natural artistic skill is like, oh, I can do that, and then go and do the work, you see?
Hmm.
And so those types of things. And this is a moment where we can all think about what is it that fuels us as makers and creators.
Hmm.
If nobody ever sees it, if nobody ever sees it, would I still do it?
Hmm.
Does it keep me alive? It is the question of, why do you want to breathe?
Hmm. Oh,
These things are not, they're not separate. Uh,
goodness. And I
so
guess
yeah.
Abegunde, I love you. I'm so happy to see you. This is you made my day. Oh,
Me too.
I,
It's great. It's
I,
great. Thank you so much for inviting the conversation.
yes,
Um, I think it's important. Well, I know it's important, to think about these things in this way and to really unattach. I mean, I think about Octavia Butler, how many decades did it take? No, I don't know if you saw the article where she, finally was on the New York Times bestsellers list, right? This
right,
was one of her goals, right? But this happened, decades after, the books were published, after
right.
she's died, right? We have to find a way to, it's not that, we don't want to be seen and we don't want our work out. That's not it. But Gwendolyn Brooks, like, no lie, when she sent me back a note to say, literally forget about focusing on what the audience wants, what you would create, like do the work that you want to do.
Hmm.
Right? Do the work that you want to do in the world. Right? And that's where that joy comes from, and the gratitude, and being able to find balance and realign yourself and find the community that you want to support you,
Right,
right? It can be a lonely life, right? But it doesn't have to be, because there are lots
right,
of other people out there who are quite interested in breathing,
right. And breathing.
right?
Ugh.
Right? In breathing.
So I guess Oh my God, you're giving us so much to think about. I'm so excited. I'm so excited for people to listen to this. Uh, well, I guess in closing,
Mhm.
what is one or two things that you're doing right now to keep yourself joyful? I think for me, it's funny that you mentioned dancing because I love to dance. I also know that you love to dance. Uh, it's and my friend sent me this album, which you would love. It's by a group named Salt, so it's SAULT, and it's untitled Rise. And there's literally a song called I Just Wanna Dance on the album.
Mhm.
Uh,
Oh, okay.
you would love, 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 love this album. Um, and they sent it to me the other day, and I literally spent probably an hour just like in my room, full out dancing as though there was like I was in a club, like I was somewhere else, like it was just me. And at first, it kind of felt goofy. I'm like, but then I just kind of let myself go and got into it. And I remembered, I was like, oh my God, I love doing this,
Mhm.
and like I don't need anybody else to do this. I just need to cut on my music and I can sit in my room and I can change the world around me. I can change my world like in about 30 minutes if I just let myself go and get at it. And so that's one thing that I think I'm going to start being more. I'm gonna make sure I safeguard time to do that. Because at first I was like, oh, that's goofy. But then I did it and I just sat down and I walked outside. I was like, look at me. I'm in the world. I just finished dancing. you know? And so I don't know. What's one thing what you've been doing to keep yourself lifted during this time?
Dancing for sure. That's like one of the first things I do when I get up in the morning time,
Hmm.
particularly range of music. But not so much now because it's getting cooler,
Mm.
but being in the hammock. So one day I had about an hour between meetings. And the thing is, I heard people say, "Oh, I've got an hour. I'm going to do this. I can get this work done. I can get this written." I'm like, I got an hour between meetings, 45 minutes in the hammock.
Yes.
45 minutes in the hammock. So I grabbed like Wine Enthusiast and what other magazines that I had. And I'm like, woo, let me get in the hammock. And I just jumped in the hammock for 45 minutes, wrapped myself up a little because the sun was like right in my eye, got out my magazine and read my magazine. And when the 45 minutes was up, I went to my next meeting. And I'm thinking, I don't want to be writing and trying to figure out how I can get more work done.
Right.
Just
I
got
want
an
to be in the
hour, woo, right? And so it's those kinds of things, right, that I've enjoyed, particularly over the summer, to do that. And yes, and definitely dancing.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Everkunde. I appreciate you so much. This was
Oh my God.
awesome. I feel
Thank
so
you so
good.
very much. I really appreciate you and the work and the thoughts and everything. And it is so important to think about what the possibilities are.
Right.
Right, what the possibilities are. We have so much potential,
So much.
so much. Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you
Thank
so much,
you.
Everkunde.
Thank you
I
so
know that this will
much
help
for this.
people.
Thank you.
Mm.
Bye.